Today, India stands at a confluence of a rich past, an industrious present, and a bright future with all its underlying paradoxes. Those engaged in the freedom struggle envisioned a nation with goals that were focused inwards. The next generation strengthened this foundation in context of a globalized world. And the current generation is building on this momentum of internal integration and external adaptation. For each generation, actions have been influenced by opportunities and compulsions of respective times. How do we critically examine our inheritance and add to it? Amidst a conflict ridden world, how do we shape India of today with our inherent DNA of inclusion, tolerance, and compassion? What could be the outcome of such an approach at a personal and societal level? To explore this subject and more, here is a conversation with Amar Kulkarni, a sales and marketing professional by the day, musician by evening, a student of Indian philosophy, and a keen observer of socio-economic behaviours. Born and raised in Belgaum, he has over 2 decades of experience in the CAD/CAM industry and likes to tell stories through his work and music. Welcome, Amar, to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Milinji, for having me here.
Amar, as you would know, our Wings podcast is about discovering the India of today through the eyes and ears of young Indians.
Yep.
And you would have probably heard some of our previous episodes.
Yeah.
The other idea is to also celebrate the stories of young Indians as they are, who they are, whichever part of the world they are in. And I'm so happy and excited to meet you in person today, representing that cohort of young Indians who, in my view, is a glimpse of today's India.
Wonderful. Thank you for saying that. It's an absolute pleasure for me also to be here and share whatever thoughts that we have. And I guess we're looking at finding that young India's confluence with what experience and knowledge you already have. So it'll be a fun conversation to have.
Absolutely. And as it happens in all our previous episodes, I mean, we'll just do this as a free flow conversation.
Yeah.
I honestly have no set questions or anything. So just as I'm asking you a few things, feel free to ask me anything that you wish to.
Yeah.
I think personally, as a country, we are at a very interesting stage. And if I compare that to a metaphor of a human being, where there are these toddler years and the early schooling years before one becomes a young adult, where one is ready to take decisions for oneself and own the consequences. And then kind of live through that experience to then have a solid foundation where you have an identity of your own, a vision of your own life, or at least a destiny or a direction in terms of who you want to be as a citizen. I see that way of human growth quite similar to the growth of a nation. And I personally feel that at 75 years of independence, I look at India as a stage of being a young adult, wanting and willing to own up itself in the world that it is a part of.
Right. Well, that's a very interesting thought. I agree with that. At first count, when you say it, the first response that I get is yes, it's true. At 75, India is an extremely young country. I think we are on our feet as a nation. I would agree with that perspective, and I think it's a good starting point for us to dive deep into really understanding what does that mean. Because for an individual, it's a little bit more simpler to think of identity, whilst for me it's been a complex idea to arrive at what is really the identity of India, because there's so many different Indias within this large nation. Also, we're at different stages of evolution or circumstance when it comes to culture, when it comes to economy, when it comes to a global point of view, all of these things. So, how does India look at its own self? Which lens are we choosing, or which point of view we are choosing? I think that changes a little bit of that opinion as to saying, are we really a young country, or do we stand up and say, we're a really wise old nation?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what is being hammered through the media today, where there's a lot of focus and spotlight on the parampara or the tradition and the 5,000 years plus of history, which says that there was this golden era of the country at one point in time where, when you look at some of the books that have been written past, and I was reading one from a beautiful book. I don't recall its exact title, but written by somebody called Sanjeev Sanyal, who is an economist turned writer. Right. And he talked beautifully, and he had a lot of data and evidence to say that about 300 years back, India represented almost 25% of global trade. To, of course, the size and scale and the nature of trade was very different then. Yeah. But even today, when you look at yourself as a young Indian yourself, at least through the Wings podcast, we have met so many young Indians who are fairly rooted in the sense of being Indian, yet see themselves as a global citizen.
Absolutely, yes.
Where do you come from?
Well, that's really the conflict for me always. To measure exactly who we are and what we want to become, I think that in the middle of that is where the conflict lies. And to make that understanding a little bit simpler, I'd like to narrate the story about how I view this. And the viewpoint comes from an incident that I experienced as a child, probably in my 9th grade, when I found letters that my grandfather had written. And I don't know if these were letters or just notes, because they weren't mailed, they were still in the house, and addressed to a friend. So it probably was a exercise that the teacher gave, saying write a letter to your friend or something like that. In 1929, somewhere between 1929 and 32, that's when my grandfather was studying his college. I think he was doing his master's in arts at that time in Shivaji University in Kolhapur. And the letter and the note said something to the effect of it. I don't remember word to word, and I wish I would have retained that letter. It would have been a value of gold today. However, what it said was to the dear friend that no matter what path we take, whether we take Savarkar's ideology or we take the Gandhian way of thinking, that freedom is inevitable, that freedom is imminent. It's right there in our face, and there's nothing escaping that. The bigger challenge is really not how to get the freedom. Now the big challenge that lies in front of us is, what do we do with this freedom? So collectively, I'm led to believe that collectively the entire generation of maybe 20-year-olds or the youth at that time had this thought in their mind saying, hey, now that we have freedom, what are we going to do? What India are we going to build? And I'm sure they had behind them certain baggage to carry with colonization, the plus and the minus both. And at the same time, the same issues as knowing the Sanskriti and Parampara of the years behind, however they were interpreted. And then, of course, the desire for the future, saying, what are we going to build? We see Europe is such an industrialized set of nations. Should we build an industrialized India, or we look at an agricultural center because that's where we are? But they had that mission. It was quite clear to everyone, saying, we need to build this country. So they developed everything that would make the base of the nation, like agriculture, education being the biggest campaign at that point of time. Cut to maybe 25, 30 years ago in my father's generation, that was already taken care of. He was born at the time when freedom was announced, and that he had never experienced it in his lifetime. But came to a point where education was also a given. He went to schools, he went to colleges. There wasn't a question of whether you get education or not during his time for him.
This was 1950s.
This would be the 60s, 50s, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. 50s. And I would say from the 50s to the mid 60s, that the point in time, education was already in a lot of places. There were a lot of universities, colleges, and I'd like to connect that to another incident where my father told me once they were standing. A bunch of his friends were all standing outside the college in Belgaum, and a senior person just walked by and said, "What are you guys doing?" And they all said, "No, we just finished college now, and we're just hanging, figuring what to do in life." And he said, if you guys are free, we go write an exam for this bank that's coming up, nationalized banking. It just opened up, and there was a massive campaign that the government was pushing, that we need people to work in these banks so that we can enable this sector of finance. And they all went and wrote these exams, and they got into banks, and the motivation was very high for people also to get these jobs through. People were saying, don't worry about how to write this exam. Here's your answers. Just fill up the exam. Just clear these exams. We need people right now. That kind of a motivation. And so for that generation, there was this understanding that, okay, we need to sustain what freedom has been given and built. Now is the time when we need to have a solid central family-based system of India. So I think banking, and then the industrialization process of having entrepreneurs, all of that started massively in the 60s.
Oh yeah, 60s. I think the government then, I think this was the Nehru government, if I recall right, was a huge focus on public sector with a idea of building a socialist economy.
Yes.
Which today can be debated as right or wrong, but in hindsight, when you look at it, and I was reading a beautiful article also somewhere that there was something called a Bombay Plan that was written by the industrialists of the 1940s and 50s, which is Mr. J.R.D. Tata, Mr. G.D. Birla, and the Murugappa group founders from South, right, or the Burmans of the East, etc. It says what economy we want for the country, and they wrote something called a Bombay Plan and gave it to Nehru, and basis which the focus then was private entrepreneurship and private capital in the India of 50s and 60s was absolutely non-existent. So the only way to build an economy is where the government takes the bulk of the load and puts in capital and builds industries, and that's how I think public sector came up. Which I think set the roots for the first 30-40 years. Of course, it brought a whole lot of other ills too. But yes, coming back to your father's story, I think that was a generation which chose an industry or an institution and spent their life there, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's very important, and you brought out the right word that stuck to me, and I discovered it a few years ago, that India had a socialist point of view, and it was quite strong at that point in time. I did not even understand, like, there were formations of unions and how the public sectors led to the formation of union, and there was this justice-based system. And it's really remarkable for me because my father was a union leader for the bank employees for 11 years, or I think 15 years, something like that, 3 terms. And we would get red envelope letters to our house with Comrade Sudhir Kulkarni written on it. I never paid attention to that. I just said, Comrade, it must be something. I used to get magazines from Russia, Misha magazines from Russia. There was a solid influence of world. I think half the world was believing in the socialist ideology at that time.
No, it was, because I think the world had come out of the World War. And just about every country around the world was trying to, re-establish itself as a nation. And the ideas, Marxist ideas, were very strong that whilst there was a strong American-driven capitalistic idea saying that capitalism is the answer to all the ills, but then there was this huge realization that in all that the rights of the workers also might get trampled upon. So who are the owners of the enterprise? Of course, those who put capital, but the stakeholders are equal, right? The employees have an equal share. But then I think if we move further ahead, I mean, unfortunately, the socialistic system or the public sector in India brought in a lot of bureaucracy, brought in a lot of corruption. And I remember there was a time when the production capacity of a manufacturing plant had to be approved by the government.
They decided what.
They decided how much of capacity you were to have. And obviously, in hindsight, one looks at it because I think it was a resource-constrained world. So resource allocation was a big thing, right? From capital, men, material, natural resources, and so on and so forth. But I think the world of 90s changed a lot, where the G of globalization was being talked about. And I myself probably is sandwiched between the generation of your father and yourself. I think I'm in the middle of that.
Right in the middle. You've seen both these things.
In that sense that, finding a job when I finished my engineering was very important. Looking for security was very important. But at the same time, discover myself and the world that was emerging was a simultaneous process. Which I think every generation goes through, right? I mean, if I were to ask you, Amar, you are trying to imagine and envision a life of your own
Yes.
in a world that is emerging.
Yes.
So there are two emerging phenomena happening here.
Yeah.
You as a person are emerging,
Yes.
so is the world around you and the world that you relate to and connect to. So how do you see these two emergent phenomena playing out, let's say, in the here and now today?
That's a very, very interesting question and a really good one at that. I come back to that point of view that for me, it is this point of view which has become a question to say, now that we have the choice of this, we could choose anything. I firmly believe that now we are sort of in a generation where we have the good of both sides and the bad of both sides laid out in front of us, and now we are in a position to even pick and choose.
So what are the both sides you're saying here?
So one is to build on the narrative which has been presented to us, to say here's what the world looks like. So here to make it more simpler to understand, you've been given an education, you choose your degree, probably engineering or medical or one of those, mostly tech driven because of the movement through the 90s, and then you go to the US, you do your advanced studies, and then most became US citizens, of course, but the narrative was that's how you build your life. So there was a set of people that just moved never to come back, and then they built their life, which is how it was at that point of time. There's another set of people who could not circumstantially move, either because they did not have the education or they had certain things that tied them back here, and there were some that really just chose saying, I don't want to do that and I want to stay here. As of then, from then, and this I would say about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, irrespective of which choice that generation or that class or batch of people did, everyone's come to a point where the children, either my age or younger than I, have a fairly secure family system and social and economical system to say that, well, right now we've made enough money to own a house of our own and to allow you the freedom to say you don't have to struggle for shelter. So if you want to choose the arts, no, go ahead. If you want to choose dancing as a career, yeah, you can give it a shot. You want to be a writer, no problem, you can do that. And I'm not just talking about arts, but any career or entrepreneurship, for example. To start a business 30 years ago and to fail meant end of life. Failure had so much shame attached to it that few people really took that chance because of the risk of failure more than this. But now we live in a world where startup economy is encouraged. There are not just families, there are banks and businesses and venture capitalists. Everyone's coming and saying, you have an idea, start something.
Yeah, in fact, one even reads that if only you have failed twice or thrice, somebody is willing to put money on you. Right? That's the world we are living in.
Yeah.
But yeah, continue.
So the example I put forth is to give a glimpse of how, you see, there are choices now in front of us. So we have the choice to say, let's build on the narrative that our parents taught us, that go forward, learn and build and work for a large organization, go to the US, go to the UK, settle down in a different country, buy a house, have a family, and do that. Or to say, okay, thank you for making our life secure at this point. Now that I have that choice, I'm going to question, investigate, and really do what punches. I really want to do something that's genuinely me and not just follow the narrative. Both are today possible, much more than ever before. And I think that's what giving rise to the conflict and a fair bit of confusion, which is natural.
So if I were to ask you that if, Amar, you were to stand in front of a mirror right now, what is the person that you see looking at you? And what is that person saying to you?
It frankly depends on the time of the day.
I know. I'm talking of a time of the day when you have not had your drink or two. But yes, you are in a mood to reflect and listen.
Yeah. To me, it's even today, and this is something that I even did on my drive here. I was reflecting this thought even on my drive here. I think it's today possible to be both. Why I did that half joke about timing is because at 9 I wear a suit and I wear formal shoes and I go to an office like a vice president of a company, and at 7 in the evening I wear super colored sneakers, let my hair loose, and I become a musician. And both are actually quite genuine to me. It's not like some people who'd say, I hate my day job and I really wish I could be a musician. It's not true for me. For me, it's like, I love my day job too. I really love what I do, the whole technology and the meeting people and the building of this industrial movement of new technology. It's quite fascinating, and I've always done it with fascination and enthusiasm. Same with music. So for me today, it's both, and I think I'm forcing myself to really choose. While I think I live in an economy where both are possible, and not just economy, I live in a social system where both are possible.
So if we were to hypothetically look at a canvas which has two parts, which is either vertically split or diagonally split or horizontally split, and in one part of the canvas, if we were to paint Amar, the one vice president of a company who wears a suit and a boot and is into online meetings and extensive travel all around the world, in a 9 to 6 job or 9 to 7 job, and then the other Amar who wears sneakers and picks up his guitar. Paint the two pictures for us and let's see if anything merges into one another.
I think the merging point exists for me in terms of connecting with people. Both these things take me to people, to newer people, allows me to tell stories. Both these places facilitated my and continue to facilitate my need to hear different circumstances, different experiences, and pretty much even in my day job, I do presentations and I talk to people and I place forward narratives and stories and what if scenarios, which is what we also do with music. We're telling people, ye hota to kya hota, waise hota to kya hota, and I think that's the merging point for me. It's the connection with people.
So, Amar, the professional, person who does business during the day with customers and global, employees all around the world. What's the nature of the work there, and what are the problems that you're addressing in that world?
When I look at it from clearly the question point of view as to what problems I address, there is a need to be creative. There is a need to usher in new thinking. There's a need to look at a storytelling aspect of the business. The voice from the business to the market, it needs to be told in creative new ways every now and then in every market, in every company. I think that is the need that is being satisfied in what I do every day. The challenges that I look at are all challenges as to what are we saying to our buyers, what are we saying to our market.
What sort of product do you deal with?
So these are products that are used in the quality control process in manufacturing industries, mainly to validate if the products have been made in comparison to the design. That's the first step. So we make inspection software which is used to inspect parts. But in the larger scale of things, we not just do that, we collect all of that measurement data, we put it on our central location so that all the stakeholders like design and engineering and manufacturing and production, all the stakeholders that work with quality processes access that data for their decision making. So this is the tool that we develop, and our company's been doing it for about 30 years now.
And you've been doing this for how long now?
With this company for 15 years almost.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
15 years.
So what are Amar's takeaway in this 15 years?
I think, it's been a great journey, frankly. I really have had a fantastic 15-year experience with this product and this technology, and particularly in India, because when we started this in India, the concept of inspection really was just go, no go. The job of inspection was just to find out if the parts are good or not good. But with technologies, and not just our product, but technology in general has evolved so much where quality control today is in a position to call decisions or throw light on areas where production or design or tooling can actually make well-informed decisions because the technology in inspection has improved so drastically.
Yeah, I mean, I also, come from the software and the IT world where I have spent much of my life.
Yeah.
Almost 36 years.
Yeah.
And a stage where I'm kind of reading a very interesting way of designing and developing software.
Yeah.
Which was unthinkable at the time when I was, in the midst of all that.
Yeah.
Concepts like test-driven development.
Yeah.
TDD.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which says that don't design your software or a product, even it could be a mechanical product, till such time you have test plans in place.
Right.
So QA and QC, which
actually
is what you
everything.
and your company deal with, it happens first.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's the only way to come out with a world-class product.
Absolutely.
But I think as a country also I have seen this. I mean, I have kind of seen my work life, which kind of began in the mid 80s, 1985, 1986, when I started my career. And up till now, which is I think almost 35 years now, 35, 36 years, I did experience a very different India, where it became open to the world at large.
Yes.
It slowly started integrating in the world.
Right.
I mean, we're talking of the reforms process
Right.
kicked in 1991, which was more a crisis reaction.
Yeah.
Thanks to the extremely low foreign exchange reserves that the country had, and we had to park our country's gold in the Bank of England and get dollars. And but from then till now, we have reached a stage where you can buy a pan or a cigarette using a QR code.
Yes.
And which is the biggest innovation that India as a country has given to the whole world. Where billions of Indians are saying Paytm karo or a GPay karo.
Phenomenal.
And as a country, we also started building great products and services, not for ourselves, but for the world as well.
Yes.
So, as a young Indian, where you are right now, where do you see, as a country, an opportunity for us? And what would be the disastrous consequences if we don't leverage those opportunities?
Good question.
I wonder if these thoughts happen to you, but it happens to me.
It's a very good question. I would like to rather ask a little bit more detail to get your perspective on this shift that you just mentioned. When you're looking at you had a fully formed young person outlook in the 80s.
Yes.
And a fully matured, experienced mindset in the 90s to gather both. So what I'm looking for in terms of the information to find out is, you saw the big movement of the entrepreneurial India really coming out.
Yes.
Where kids not from industrial families stood up and said, I'm starting a business. Or going to a position within an organization to say, I'm going to set up the business for this company and run it. Very much like what you've done it personally yourself as well.
Yes. For 10 years, I was involved in creating 2 startups. One was, what shall I say, relatively successful from the investor's point of view. One didn't make money. But I've had the mix of both worlds. But yes, I was a first generation entrepreneur. There's nobody in my family who set up business. But this was in the mid 90s when capital was available in India for ideas that are emerging in India, which were focused on problems that were pretty local. Problems of efficiency, problems of productivity. But you're absolutely right.
So with that point of view, the question that what information I'm looking for is, what was really the biggest challenge if you had to be an entrepreneur before the 91 point? Did you see that happening at all, that someone would say, I will find capital from somewhere, but I have this motivation or I have this idea of starting off a business?
So I will have to then look at my early years of my own career, and also reflect on the work life that my father had. In that sense, look at the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. If I have to look at, I think what I was blessed with as a generation who began his professional career in the late 80s into 90s was trust. We were trusted that what we are trying to put out as a vision or a proposal or an investment idea, and the passion that was behind it, there was somebody who was willing to listen and somebody who was willing to trust. Now, the confidence that I had as an entrepreneur, there were enough and more people like me in my earlier generation. And probably in your grandfather's generation in the 1920s and 30s. So as Indians, or probably as people in any nation, the young energy never is lack of any confidence. So confidence was all along there. What changed for my generation was somebody who was willing to listen to us and willing to trust us and willing to take a risk on us.
Right.
And this was, of course, thanks to a lot of private capital
Yeah.
that came in. And of course, over the last 25, 30 years,
That's only expanded.
which has only expanded
Yeah.
manifold,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
what is available, if I can use the word, as an inheritance,
Yeah.
blessing to your generation.
Yes. Yeah, it is an inheritance. It is. I think that, many people, it's just an off the subject comparison, but a necessary comparison. There's a lot of these discussions about Nehru government did this, or the earlier governments did this and did that, and there are many point of views where we can complain about what India has not done in the past, whilst also praise what India has done in the past. But I always prefer to look at it from that generation's own circumstances. It's like, can I go back today and say my grandfather didn't buy a car at that time and complain about it? I can't. Could I have said that, my grandfather had an opportunity to be an engineer or retain his farms instead of giving them away, and today I would have been sitting on 100 acres of farmland? I think it's a unfair complaint on my behalf.
No, you're absolutely right, and I'm glad that you, as a representative of the young Indians of today, is appreciative of the fact of the compulsions that the prior generations had. For example, I remember I grew up in my childhood years when to have a television at home, which was a black and white television, we had to pay a tax to the government of 50 rupees per year.
Wow, I didn't know this.
Yes. 1972, when black and white television arrived in India for the first time, it was considered as a luxury product.
Wow.
And every owner had to pay a tax of 50 rupees a year, which was a lot of money those years, to the government. And as a 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, I had to go to the local post office, because that's where you had to go and pay the tax.
Wow.
And we had a card that the television retailer gave it to us, along with the television set that we bought from him, which said that this is the name of the person, which is of course my father's name, my address, which was an address in Shivaji Park in Mumbai, and the brand of the television that we had. And it was like a card.
Wow.
Right? Which identified the owner and the television product.
It's like a warranty card.
No, it was like a passbook.
Wow.
Bank passbook.
Wow.
Yeah. And
then, so for the tax.
For the tax basis. So I had to, every time, I think April or May, which is the start of the financial year, we had to go, and my father gave me that job. It was probably my training as a 10-year-old to take that little passbook, go to the post office, stand in a queue, and pay 50 rupees of tax to own a television.
Wow.
Right? Look at now. People are buying
anything.
3 mobile phones in a year and all that stuff. So I think where I'm getting at is, as a generation which is slightly prior to yours, we lived through an era of scarcity. And I say scarcity is scarcity of some fundamental issues. For example, scarcity of food. I mean, 70s is when I grew up as a child. There was food scarcity in India. The country was importing wheat, country was importing rice, sugar, just about everything that you talk about. Milk was not easily available. So the focus of the government and the generation and the policy makers then was to ensure food security. Right? And it has taken a huge one generation to ensure some basic security like food, like energy and fuel. Which is a foundation for any human endeavor, isn't it? Which is now taken for granted today.
Absolutely.
I mean, today I can say what kind of
food you want.
What kind of food I want, not what variety of cheese do I want.
No, even that.
Cheese was alien. For us, cheese was alien.
Yeah.
But then coming back to where we are talking about is, as a generation, you yourself, when you look at what has come to you through sweat and blood of prior generation, and of course through your own life, and in the making you had to add to that. What are the opportunities that are available to you, and what are the resources that you believe you as a generation have got from the contributions of the prior generation?
I think it's phenomenal. The opportunities are endless. I think we have everything on a platter right now. We have the backing of a stable financial system, whether it's from the government or whether it's from our own the ways and habits. We have built this familial keep some savings, have some assets balance that we don't see so often with youngsters outside in many countries. I think so. We have a solid backing. We have a familial system where we still have parents saying, "Don't worry, I have this right written off to you after I'm gone." We don't see that in a lot of places either, and in some cases, it's now taken for granted, unfortunately. So, long story short, I think we are sitting on a goldmine of ideas. We are at the cusp of many innovations, but we are experiencing them differently. Automation, the need for technology, all of these things we see differently because of the nature of the nation itself. We don't live in a country where there's a shortage of manpower. We don't live in a country where things are super expensive because it's hard to grow or hard to find. Of course, not everything, but by and large, most of the things that we need. So I think that we have a phenomenal opportunity base right now. What we will need to continue to work on is keep developing this ability and habit to accept failure as a part of that system, and to move forward to say failure has to teach and we have to learn. I think we will have that. What to me individually is very essential is to question the path that we take. Are we going to go all out trying to say, because to complete my sentence before, are we going to go in an all out route to say we will become what the West has become today and only do it better? Or are we going to say, well, the West has done what the West will do, we will do what we have to do. And this will be a completely new thought and a new ideology and a new social framework, and not capitalist and not socialist and not something, but something entirely new which understands things from a more broader perspective. Because fortunately in India, on the same day, you see so many different things in the spectrum, almost see from one end of the spectrum to another spectrum, from abject poverty to extreme luxury and riches. You will see whether in India from one end to the other end, exposures of all kinds of people and circumstances, which leads me to believe that we have the opportunity to think, how can we do something that encompasses all of these things? And that to me is very interesting.
Say more, because you seem to be pulled towards this idea of looking at the best of both worlds.
Yes.
And say that what can we design new?
Yes. So the new is essential, because when we say the best of both worlds, we still are mimicking or imitating something that already exists.
Sure.
And which is great as a reference point. But looking at the capacity that we have, the potential is much higher to rather create something new. And it will be new by the nature of its own creation. But I think it requires a shift in the mindset to say, we built the best XYZ, it's better than the ABC, is not going to cut it, in my opinion.
True, because I'll tell you what, thanks to the Wings podcast and the conversations we have had with so many young Indians over the last 2 years now, what at least I have experienced firsthand from the stories and narratives of these amazing young people, young Indians, wherever they are living, is though they are being invited by the ideas of West, which is the ideas of consumer is the king, and as if there is no world tomorrow. This is the only life you're going to have, and so on and so forth. Which has resulted, at least in much of the world, of this what I call is as the take, make and waste generation.
Yes.
I think young Indians are questioning that.
Yes.
They say that yes, abundance is there.
Yes.
I can buy anything on a click from a Myntra or an Amazon, or I have a food delivery, Blinkit, Swiggy, restaurants, everything. So everything is at my beckoning, which means all I have to do is open my app on the mobile phone and make choices of the stuff that I want, and it will get delivered to my home within a certain specified time. Else I might get it free or whatever. I find young Indians actually pausing to press the button saying checkout. What could be happening there when you are given tons of choices to consume and you have resources? and financial means, because young Indians are earning good money in their mid-20s and early 30s.
Yeah.
And this is not a phenomenon of urban India too.
No.
Urban, semi-urban, rural India as well is happening there.
Yeah.
But then young Indians are becoming conscious consumers is what I'm getting a sense. Though I am a little distanced from that generation, but I'm sensing that, which I'm happy if that's how it turns out to be, a generation of conscious consumers.
I would love that to happen for real, for a lot. It is certainly happening. I don't have any doubts about that, because I spent some time with my nieces. They're 14, 16 years old. The bass player in my band is 21. So, and my drummer is 29. So, I spent considerable amount of time observing how they take their decisions, and I'm super impressed and almost inspired. Not almost, I'm actually inspired the way they are conscious about their decisions. And I think it's true what you said. There is enough exposure for them to see both ends, enough to consciously judge themselves, make a judgment themselves, saying, hey, I know this is available to me. Do I really need it? Am I ready to splurge on this right now? What is this action for? Is this a splurge? Is this a necessity? I think they're doing a very good job about it. Now, I, for one, am nowhere in my mind at this point looking at a 15-year-old saying, oh, these kids will never get it. We were the smart ones, or it was better at our time. These 15-year-olds, they're always on their phone doing. I actually am not seeing that. I'm seeing 15-year-olds a lot more conscious about their decision making than even my gen was.
And interestingly, I have grown up with a narrative, which again, I'm coming from a context which was of scarcity.
Yes.
Which said in many unsaid ways, कि चादर देख के पैर फैलाओ.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Look at your bed sheet and say, how long do you want to stretch your feet?
Yes.
So basically, stay within the
limits of
the limits of what you can create and earn and save.
Yeah.
The generation that I'm seeing right now, and I don't want to sit on a value judgment here, which is saying that I will not stop stretching my feet.
Yeah.
But if it goes out of my bed sheet, I will try and find out how can I make my bed sheet bigger and longer.
Yes.
Which is a brilliant thinking, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that spillover is stopped, because I think there was a necessity when someone said, don't go outside the limits of what you can. It was true and it was real at that point in time. But I think that the problem started arising when it started spilling over into everything.
Correct.
Like every decision then is being looked at from then saying, oh, but you already have one pair of shoes. Why do you need another one?
Correct.
And then now we've come to a point saying, I do understand the comfort of wearing hiking shoes when I go for a hike versus being on a beach on a set of floaters. And I understand this comfort and I appreciate that, and I can afford it. And it's fine.
And I think in some ways it is also adding to the economic activity of the country too. I mean, consumption is not a bad idea. Is a current reality. Profit is not a bad idea. Spending money is not a bad idea. Spending money on yourself is also not a bad idea. Or dining out once a week or once in 2 weeks is also not a bad idea. As long as I'm able to meet my own needs. And I also find the India of today, the young Indians, which is statistics say is what 60% of Indian population is under 30.
Yeah, under 40, I guess.
Under 35 or something like that, which is a huge demographic dividend,
massive.
Which hopefully it will deliver. There is a hope that we are living at. But then, what one is saying over here is generation which is saying that I will experiment with life.
Yes.
And I will own up the consequences.
Yes.
Unlike my generation and probably the prior to that, which was saying that I'm afraid of experimenting because I'm afraid of the consequences. And the reason I'm afraid of the consequences is I'm not sure about my own ability to own up the consequences.
And the scarcity of everything else.
Which is like the pendulum has swung the other side. Isn't it?
Yes.
And this is beautifully, I think, depicted by Nandan Nilekani in this amazing book he wrote called Imagining India, the idea of a renewed nation, which is his vision of the 21st century India that it can be.
Nice.
It's a big fat book,
nice.
A lot of research there, long read, etc. But then the central theme of that book is
Yeah.
probably much of what we have been talking for almost 30-40 minutes now, is as a nation, as a young nation of 75, a nation with many, many young people, 60% of the 1.4 billion, at a crossroad, borrowing from your own words, Amar, having an opportunity to make a choice as to what life do I want to build for myself. And hence, in the bargain, collectively build it for the nation. If I were to kind of bring it down to you as Amar Kulkarni, at the age and stage of life that you are in today, what is the vision that you are having for yourself? And the impact of that on the ecosystem that you are a part of. Maybe we could kind of towards the end of our conversation go in that direction.
Sure. I think it's cathartic to speak about it, if you ask me. The reason for it is, from my historical experiences through my childhood, I've seen my father being a community service person. He's been a public person always. He's been a union leader. He's been a leader amongst the area where we live, the society. He's put his hands into selflessly doing things to accommodate the society that he has created for himself. But of course, being part of it, to assist it to function and to make sure that everyone's grievances are met, and basically to take care of his own surroundings, and of course, at a personal level, it must be meeting certain requirements that he feels as an individual. But I have seen growing up a public persona of him. And that fascinates me a lot since childhood. I've always had this thought in my mind that somewhere I would like to see how thought influences people, and how those influences can be brought for the common man to become more powerful. We still live in a country where decisions, the discussion that we had so far, when it revolves around the economy and business and the consumer capitalist world, a lot is happening in India, and we are actually at the forefront of many things. What needs to and what is not changing, and in my opinion, really where my conflict arrives at eventually, is how can we influence thinking in those quarters? The power shift has not happened. Trade does a lot of things for India, and yet the power is controlled by the state.
Take an example.
As an example, the system of governance, policy making in itself, is still driven by people far disconnected from the people itself, from the common man. How do we create changes to that system? I have no answers. These are the questions that I'm dealing with. Saying, if there is a policy being made for anything ranging from reservations to women empowerment to just justice to system of equality to even just civic sense amongst people, how do we make these changes happen? There's common discussions. Everyone hears this. I had a friend who's been in the US, who comes back, lives in India, loves it, and wants to continue living in India. 1 hour of driving on the streets, and she comes back home and says, I think I want to go back to the US. This thing every day I can't deal with.
It's such a messy country.
It's such a messy. Why can't they just understand? Why is it so comfortable for one to just drive on the opposite side? Or my friends who come back from the US stand at an ATM. There's someone just walks into the ATM and you're in the queue, and they usually look at me and say, "Ye kab badlega?"
Correct.
They're not looking for answers. It's just that question that they have, that I have, saying, okay, now when we as the youth have the potential and the capacity to understand the best of both worlds, when are we going to start doing things that will start affecting civic sense? And to give you an example, I had a conversation once with my brother-in-law where he said, "Bhai, tu itna sab baat karta hai, why don't you get into the political system?" And my answer was, "Main maar khane se darta hu." Because you see, that's how raw the system is.
Yes.
The opponent, if I'm going to stand up for a corporatist election, there is a very, very strong, good chance that the guy is going to turn up with a few goons at my doorstep and say, "Bhai, tera naam nikal do. I don't want
Withdraw
you."
your form.
Withdraw your form, that's it. Or else I will break your bones. This kind of the physical harm of things is ridiculous to me.
Correct.
We live in a system where one can consider threat to their own life. How do we change that? So those are the areas where I would really like to think more about at an individual level. Can music influence that? Can business influence that? Can I have more conversations within just my own peer group? It won't help because my peer group is already exposed to this. My peer group already agrees to this point of view and saying, "Haan, badalna chahiye." But what can we do to change it? And that's where I'm lost.
But I don't know. I mean, what you say is absolutely right. Is somebody who is living abroad and have made a life abroad, like your friend, she came from the US, and there are, I mean, I know of many young Indians. My own son who lives in Silicon Valley right now, he's having a great, life there. He migrated. I don't know. He's an Indian citizen, but I don't know. He might choose American citizenship for various reasons, which I will accept and appreciate. But nonetheless, there are hundreds and thousands and more of Indians living across the world who want to come back to the country. And they're, in a way, in their own gated community, they will exactly live the same life that they're living wherever, in Australia or Canada or Singapore or wherever. But once you, as you said, when you step out of your gated community, you are in a society which is messy. And yes, it is a fact. And what you also talked about is, as a country, we are ticking quite a few boxes on an economic growth model for the country.
Tremendous.
Over the last 3 decades plus, there's a lot of experiments that have happened. Probably a mixed version of public sector ethos and private sector energy for earning profit is coming together as an experiment. However, this reformation or change or transformation in the political system hasn't happened. But as an optimist, I believe maybe that's another one generation phenomena. When the next generation of politicians who have grown up in the new India take positions of power.
Wow. That was going to be my question to you. Do you think that this is just a natural evolution of things, and that wait long enough and it will happen for sure, or is there something that will need to be forced, like 91 changed the economic outlook and several things for India? Like there was a trigger point that did it. Does this need some sort of a trigger point?
Very interesting question, Amar, and I have a speculation for that. And which is my sense of where we are today as a nation in the world that is out there. Clearly, the so-called developed world and its narrative, which is again America, Western Europe, much of the developed economies in Southeast Asia. I believe they have run their course in terms of consumption-driven economy. Right. It is kind of hitting a dead end. And it's a model which, as they say, is being drummed up way beyond its expiry date. And of course, they are looking at where is the next big consumption that is happening. Same story which is getting repeated. And they are saying, here is a country of a billion plus people. We can find tons of consumers here. So one of these external forces will change the policy making in the country, for sure. Because what the drive for economic growth will also bring in a push for democratic processes. Because what the world has also realized, and I think COVID was, in my view, a huge wake-up lesson. And a big message that came out in COVID was, unless and until every person on the planet is not vaccinated, I am not safe. Because COVID exposed us to one strong reality that here is an invisible enemy which can move from one place to the other without anybody's knowing and affect just about everybody. So unless everybody on the planet is taken care of, I am not taken care of. My well-being is so connected and deeply entwined to the social well-being of the world at large, which is a new thinking that is happening. And I believe that's a trigger point where inclusiveness at a massive scale is the call for the day. And as a country, whether we know it or not, despite all the messiness of the country, all the paradoxes of tall high rises, extremely rich people, sharing a neighborhood with people who are slum dwellers.
Yes.
That's a paradox of India today.
Yeah.
There is abundance and scarcity coexisting.
Yes.
But one of the lived reality of India, and I might sound a little romantic here, Amar, but that's where I am emotionally invested in as an idea, that as a country, we believe very unconsciously in the idea of inclusion. Despite what the politicians are wanting us to do that and create a divide amongst us.
Yes.
But on the ground, people are saying, we know this game enough.
That was going to be my question, and I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm sorry. My question was that when you think of that idea that people start realizing through the experiences in COVID that only if the world is safe, I am safe. And that idea has so many opposing forces which are constantly bombarding us saying, oh, no, but my country and my state and my language and my, all these levels of separation of representation. Saying, I represent this community, or I represent this set of people, or millennials versus Gen X versus boomers versus, everything's being compartmentalized so much. That was going to be my question, saying, how much do you believe that is going to be strong enough to fight this?
So here's the thing, the way I look at it, Amar, again, another beautiful question you put in here. I think over the last 3 decades plus, the pendulum on globalization and global integration has swung on one side far too much to threaten and question concepts of national identity.
Right.
And the idea of preserving the self.
Right.
That in the move towards hyper-globalization, I am becoming a world citizen and being painted in one color. Whereas I have my local identity, I have my local culture, I have my local language, I have my local food habits. I will not surrender that to a standard burger that McDonald's give me.
Yeah.
I'm more than willing to embrace a McDonald's burger as long as he gives me an aloo tikki burger.
Yeah.
Right?
Got it.
So the current examples and experiences we are getting world over of people now looking inward. Borders are getting closed. And people are saying that, listen, I will only, immigration, for example, is such a big issue today. Not just, in the Western world, even in country like India. I mean, labor migration is normal. I mean, people move from one region to the other for economic success. So people are closing doors there. So my belief is that this hyper movement to becoming closed is to preserve the self and the local identity.
Right.
Because over the last 3 decades, as a world and a global population, we have swung on the other side on globalization and integration, where you say what works in America will work in India, will work in Bangladesh, will work in South Africa. No,
it's not true.
And I don't know. I'm somehow, as we were conversing, off the mind, my mind has gone back to an idea called twin citizenship, which was brought forward by a British professor called Professor Charles Handy in the 90s, where he talked of a very beautiful idea, because his reference point was Europe, which was the 90s when Europe was coming in as one nation. The euro currency was being conceptualized, and every nation had to give up its currency to become euro. And there was a whole lot of
turmoil.
Political, social, economic turmoil. And the story of Europe is story of India, story of world, where how do you ensure coexistence of local identity, which is unique to a local geography or a set of people or a set of community, with a shared identity which we all collectively buy into. So the idea of twin citizenship here is, how can I be a European and an Italian at the same time?
Yes.
And how do I respect you as a European and a British person at the same time? So you come from Karnataka,
Yes.
Born and raised in Belgaum,
Yeah.
and I know one of the classic socio-political challenge Karnataka has faced over the last
Yes.
40, 50 years, because
Yeah.
I have lived in Bangalore of
Right.
the 80s,
Right.
is this Kaveri water dispute,
Water dispute, yeah.
which is unsolvable.
Yeah.
The reason I believe, and this is
Yeah.
again the romantic idealist
Yeah.
that I am
Yeah.
over here,
Yeah.
is unless and until the farmer in Karnataka,
Yeah.
who is at war with the farmer on Tamil Nadu
Yeah.
on the Kaveri river water,
Yeah.
and it's sharing between the two.
Yeah.
As long as they are talking to each other
Yeah.
as a Kannada farmer and a Tamilian
It's
farmer,
never gonna solve.
it's an unsolvable problem.
I agree.
But idea is not to give up that identity. Idea is to say I hold those identity, but together can I stand on a shared ground
Yeah.
called we are Indians.
Yes. Yes.
And how do I co-hold
Yeah.
the tension between the two?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's tension, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
if I am invested into an identity of an Indian,
Yeah.
and I'm simultaneously holding my identity of a Kannada farmer,
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to be empathetic
Yeah.
about the farmer in Tamil Nadu,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and which I believe is where the world is struggling over here.
I agree.
Is at the end of the day, the pendulum moves because
It
that's
moves.
how
Yeah.
the energy
Yeah.
system flows.
Yeah.
But this hyper globalization and the hyper inwardness
Yeah.
will somehow find a mix.
It will.
And which is where I'm coming back to the other thought of a very interesting opportunity that is available to us as Indians. And again, this is the romantic idealist in me speaking, that as Indians, I think inclusion is in our DNA. Nobody has taught us, nobody need to teach us.
Yes.
The very fact
Yeah.
that over the last 2000 years,
Yeah.
the so-called invaders
Yeah.
who came into the country
Yeah.
were no more invaders.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
settled
They
down
also
over
settled
here.
here. Yes.
Whether it is the Turks or the
Yeah.
Mongols
Yeah.
or the
Persians
Mughals or the
everyone.
Persians
Yeah. Yeah.
or even the Christian missionaries
Yes. Yes.
or the Islamic mullahs and Maulvis
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
came here to spread their religion.
Yeah. Yeah. Sufism also. All of them.
They were received, they were welcome, and they were integrated.
Yes. Yes.
So you wouldn't be surprised to see a Tamilian Christian
Yeah.
going to a Sunday mass.
Yeah.
At the same time, on the same Sunday,
Yeah.
you will find a Bengali Christian
Yeah.
or a Maharashtrian Christian going to his Sunday mass.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think as a nation or as a culture or as a part of the world, I don't know how to, and phrase this into any label.
Yeah.
But lack of any label, I think inclusion is something which is very natural to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I've been on train rides. I'm sure you must
Yeah.
have been,
I love them.
where on an Indian train, because there are only few seats and
Yes.
so many more people,
Yeah.
as the train comes into the platform,
Yeah.
everybody jumps in and grabs their seat.
Yeah.
I'm talking of an unreserved compartment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And essentially you are at war with each
Yes,
other.
yes.
And I have fought.
Yeah.
I have had
Yeah.
fist fights to catch my
Bombay.
seat on an unreserved train.
Yeah.
And an hour into the journey,
Yeah.
we open our tiffins,
And share.
we open our food,
Yeah.
we open our life stories,
Yeah.
and by the end of the journey,
Yeah. Friends.
you probably have new friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this is one opportunity, I believe, as young Indians who
Absolutely.
are living the idea of inclusion
Absolutely.
can probably give to the world of today, because I think the world needs
Yeah.
this message of
Yeah.
inclusion, without which I believe harmony won't exist.
I completely agree with that. I think it's a very solid point that this is something that we can show the world. We are doing it, and there is no need to make it grand. It's just been there. We grew up with it. We lived. I was talking to my brother-in-law Aniket some time ago and said, it's only now at 40 years that suddenly we're having a conversation and say, we just realized that in Belgaum, in our class, there was a Chatterjee, there was a Ray, there was a Chadha, there was a Singh, and there was Sayyid, and there was Ejaz, and we all never saw any of that. We just saw another buddy sitting out there, maybe a blue house or a green house or a gold house or a red house, the groups in the school, or the cricket player or the football player or the fast runner or the funny guy of the class. But it was always there. We were always very inclusive in our school experience, in our college experience, even now in the society that we live in. In this 15th August, we did a very nice event where we got everyone together to the podium, just have a cup of chai and talk about where you come from. And I was amazed, like some of these stories we didn't know. One of the uncles said, my father was a sitar player and we moved from Kolkata, but we are actually descendants from Sindhi side of things. And they're quite fascinating that this much has happened.
Yes, and if you look at it, Shabir Bhai, who is one of our very dear friends, he's a Bori Muslim. I mean, as a family, me and Asha and Rahul, as when he was growing up with us, we would look forward to Eid to go to Shabir Bhai's house for a Seer Kurma.
Okay, wow.
And vice versa, Shabir Bhai would wait for Holi because he wants Puran Poli that is made at our home. So I think food, music. Us speaking the same language. For example, the Rajasthani Marwadi traders who are, you will find them in any part of India today, running a sweet shop or anything. They speak the local dialect and the local language. So I think social inclusion is a huge unacknowledged strength we have as a nation and as a country, which we are living out day in and day out.
I think there needs to be more content made about this so that everyone's exposed to it constantly.
But I think what is also happening is, I think we don't have to do anything conscious step. I think according to that is as we Indians and young Indians and all of you who are now globalized, you travel across the world a lot, right? I mean, for your work, you work fair bit. And whenever you go, a lot of your Indianness, which in one aspect of it is this invisible presence of social inclusion.
Absolutely.
Would be getting projected.
Most definitely.
Knowingly or unknowingly.
That's the first thing that a lot of people abroad acknowledge. I went to Japan, people spoke about it. I go to Canada, people speak about it. I go to Thailand, they speak about it. I think everyone recognizes that.
And somehow, this idea of social inclusion, which consequence of that is the possibility of harmony, is in our DNA. And we just have to live it out day in and day out is where I'm sitting on right now.
I would agree with that.
I think you and I can go on this conversation on this trip
for a long spiritual idea
But I think I'm so happy and excited to kind of meander with you on a whole range of topics over here, which touched about social issues, cultural issues, and thank you for sharing those brilliant stories of your grandfather and the letter that he wrote to his friend, which talked about the freedom of India is given. In 1929, your grandfather said. The question is, what do we do with it, and how do we build a nation out of it? And your father spent his entire 40-year career working for a nationalized bank, working and doing his bit to build a strong, vibrant public sector whose benefits we are observing now.
Today.
And now you, as a 21st century Indian, asking yourself, what is the inheritance that I have received? What do I do with it? And how do I add to it? Are the three things I am seeing as
just perfect. That's exactly the summary of what is going on in my life right now.
Awesome.
And, thank you so much for having. I think I thoroughly enjoyed being candid and very comfortable with this. And having heard some of your podcasts before, this was easy for me. It wasn't challenging at all. I came completely blank in my mind, not worrying or thinking about what we are speaking about. I had a great time doing this. So thank you so much for not just doing this episode with me, but for the shows that you both have been doing. I wish you all the best, and I really hope that you do many hundreds of these podcasts.
Thank you so much. And Amar, we are enthused, and as I said, we are saying what is the 2-bit that we can add to what we as a country mean in the times that we live today, and the opportunity that is available to us to build our own nation, and in the bargain help the world at large. Because unless and until I don't see everybody around me prospering, my prosperity is not guaranteed.
My single takeaway from today's conversation with you is exactly that. I will try to structure my thoughts a little bit more on that. How do I make the world safe so I remain safe? I think that's...
And there is this old ancient concept and an idea of Atma Kalyan and Sarva Kalyan. The Sarva Kalyan is the well-being of everyone. And Atma Kalyan is my own well-being.
Yeah.
And the idea that they are so tied to each other that Sarva Kalyan, which is the well-being of the society at large, will not happen if I don't look at my own well-being.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my well-being is also dependent on the well-being of everybody.
Yeah.
So that's where you are leaving me with on this conversation.
Thank you. Let's hope that there will be another podcast with you speaking specifically on that topic.
No, we can have a conversation on that too.
Thank
Wonderful,
you.
Amar.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for your time today, my dear listeners. This is your host, Milind Agnihotri, signing off. Goodbye, take care, and stay safe. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered as a piece of any professional advice. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of its guest. Creators of this podcast expressly disclaim any and all liability or responsibility for any direct or indirect, consequential or other damages arising out of any individual's use of this podcast. For feedback and suggestions, please write to wingsindia75@gmail.com. Thank you.